our next presenter is Lisa Ozowara. We are pleased to welcome her. She is the founder of Agape Consulting, working across South Africa and Nigeria. Lisa draws attention to a critical but often overlooked issue: the underrepresentation of African context, voices, and experiences in autism research and data. Despite Africa's immense diversity, many realities remain absent from the evidence base that informs policy, funding decisions, and program design. This absence has real consequences, shaping priorities, excluding families, and limiting the relevance of proposed solutions. Lisa challenges us to ask difficult but necessary questions. Who is represented in the research? Who is missing? And what does the silence cost African families? Her work advocates for African-led research that reflects local context, values lived experience, and produce data that can drive equitable policy and systemic change. This closing section calls for knowledge production that serves African realities and amplifies African voices. It is my honor to welcome you, Lisa Ozowara. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me. This is such an exciting opportunity, and I'm glad to be here. And it's been exciting seeing all the different presenters as well. And just I'm learning a little bit more about different things going on. So I do have a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen. That way everyone can like kind of go along. So yes, so thank you again for having me. I'm going to give you guys some background about who I am, because that way you're not like, hey, who's this person talking to us about Africa? I have been working with children since 1999. I went to school, I was going to be an elementary teacher, and during my master's work, I got introduced to children with disabilities, and that was kind of my passion. I started looking into inclusion in the state of California for those with disabilities and found like it really wasn't a thing. So I started working really hard on some different things and then dove into the world of ABA and autism in 2010 and have been a BCBA since 2017. And along my journey, I am married to a wonderful man who is from Nigeria. His parents were born and raised there. So during all of this stuff, his brother is also a neuropsych. We got to learn that one of our cousins in Africa, in Nigeria, presents with autism, and her mother is a teacher, owns her own school, and is like, I don't know what to do. And then we found out she was hiding her from my mother-in-law. So that sparked a fuel in me, and it made me do some deep diving and research into why is this a hidden disease in Africa. And so that's what I want to talk to you guys about today is, what is going on and how do we change this narrative of hiding children? And something I've seen I primarily do work in South Africa, Nigeria, and I've been helping along in Kenya recently. Is that these kids are seen as a sin, spiritual warfare, and they're hidden. They're not treated the way that humans should be treated. So that is what I see across the board. And so my mission is to change that narrative and teach teachers and parents that they're children of God and they belong here. They were given to these families, and now we just need to equip the families and the community on how to work with these kids, and kind of go from there. So, just some research facts. Global autism rate. In the US, it's 1 in 32 children right now is diagnosed with autism. The US is the most advanced with the diagnosing, and that is why our number is so high. It's not that we just have more children with autism, we have the tools and the means to make sure that we are diagnosing and catching early intervention. The last presentation was on early intervention. That's a huge piece of where I love too, is when you are trying to diagnose early so we can get the tools that are needed. So that is why our numbers are high. We have a lot of that research done. Europe, there's 1 in 100. Europe is like second in line with a lot of the research and advancing. Why their number isn't as high, I don't know. Um, and so that's stuff. Worldwide, the WHO, the World Health Organization, says 1 in 127 people have autism. And then in Africa, there's no numbers, there's no research. It's guesstimates. Everything is an estimate. It's estimated that 2% of the African population may have autism. So that doesn't give us a lot of information. We've recently, in the last couple years, have been able to start seeing different organizations pop up in Africa, and we're starting to get more diagnostic done and more testing done, which is great, but we still don't have hard numbers to let us know what is the actual rate in Africa. Funding for research, the US has over $50 million given in government, mostly government and private funding to do research in autism. They're still trying to figure out what's causing autism, what the best interventions for autism are, and everything like that. London has 100 million, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And then in Africa, it's 10 to $15,000. That's nothing compared to what the other ones are doing. And that is mostly done by like nonprofits and NGOs. So those are nonprofit companies coming in and trying to do the research, trying to work along universities that may be within these countries and helping them with that stuff. So there's not a lot out there. For instance, in South Africa, there's the University of Cape Town. So it's called the CARA, the Center for Autism. They do research, but it's in Cape Town and it's only being done in high income areas of South Africa. That's not going to give us great numbers. Um, so yeah, so just current research, South Africa, diagnosing is available, but access is unequal. So private funding has quicker diagnostic rates versus the public funding, wait list up to 5 years. I in my work in South Africa, I we do like screening and assessments. We're not allowed to diagnose, but we will say like, hey, it's most likely that this child has autism. And what we end up doing is asking the parents to like go talk to their doctor, go see what they can do. But we're finding in our stuff like, oh, the child sees a speech person, and you're like, oh, great. Like they see speech. How often are they going to speech? It's once a year. That's not enough. That is not enough for a child with speech deficits to go see a speech therapist one time a year. Here in the States, we generally have it to where they go once or twice a week. So to only go once a year, that's not going to make significant progress for those children. In South Africa, all the testing is in English or in Afrikaans, which that again speaks to being high income because English is not taught until the fourth grade in the rural townships and in the villages. But even then, they don't learn to read English properly. So these testing that are all done in English and not native, it makes it hard. Um, and 80% of those who could do the diagnosing, they work in public or they work in the private health, not the public health service. And then the transportation to clinics, they're not easy to get to. So how are you supposed to go to the clinic when they are doing things and you're not able to get there, especially when you have to walk or you're relying on the city taxis, which are not getting you there. I will say from personal experience, I did get to see both the private funded and the public funding of hospitals in South Africa, and it was night and day, completely night and day. We had an employee one time we went, she ended up getting like an eye infection, and we were treated with respect. We were in and out. Um, Within like half an hour, they talked to her, they got all the details, we got medications, all that stuff. And then this last trip, we were informed that one of the ECDs that we go to, their pastor was in the hospital. He had been there for over 2 weeks. And getting to go see him in the government hospital was kind of like, whoa, this is hard. But like just seeing the hospital alone and like what the wait was outside of the hospital, what the wait was like to like get around in the hospital, it was night and day. And I can imagine it's just chaotic to try to even get to the hospital and get any testing done. So Kenya, I've been doing some stuff with Kenya recently. I went to Paka back in April of 2025, and I started working with an organization out there. But what we're seeing out there is parents are seeing multiple providers before they can even get diagnosed. And then when they are getting diagnosed, it's like 7 to 9 years old. So when you have a child who has severe autism, that's late. That is really late. And it's really hard um, to get the services going and get things going to where they should be. Um, and so again, it's limited access, limited awareness, the stigma, it's impacting those being seen by doctors. So, like we said, all of these countries, it's stigma. There's so much cultural stigma around having a disability and what did you do wrong to have a child with a disability. Um, and then the whole going to multiple providers, that's exhausting as well. So if you have to go from one doctor to the next, to the next, to the next, before you even get told what's possibly wrong with your child, that is that is draining. Um, so yeah, and then in Nigeria, there's no statistics there as well. It is not the only African country impacted by spiritual stigma, but children are seen by the witch doctors. Um, it is the highest than any other country in Africa. Families delay asking for help, children are hidden, and there's lack of trained clinicians. That's exactly like what we've been talking about. You don't have enough people who are able to go through this and help um, identify something's wrong. So it took me coming in to visit family in Nigeria and see my cousin, my husband's cousin, to be like, yeah, she most likely has autism. Here are some ways I can help you guys. Um, but they would have never gotten that help if it wasn't for me. So we want to we want to keep making sure we're doing the research. I will say a lot of my stuff, a lot of the research we're finding, it's high income. So if you're in a high income area in Africa, you are more likely going to be participating in research. The research, though, is limited to this high income. And unfortunately, like in areas like South Africa, the high income are not they're white. They're not colored. So it's not showing the true numbers of how many Africans are truly impacted by autism. So, policies in place. There are policies. Who's enforcing these policies? Um, or how do you enforce these policies in the rural areas? So Kenya has an autism bill right now that they just like voted on like November of last year. It's to help with early screening, promoting inclusion and awareness, which is great. It's needed. That kind of stuff is needed. However, when you read these policies in place and you read the like details of all of it, it has like specific like, oh, in this township, in this county, this is what needs to happen. But it doesn't solve the problem of, well, what do you do when people don't have transportation? What do you do when the nearest clinic is like 15 miles? What do you do when the families don't speak the language of the assessments? What do you do when there's not enough doctors? So that is the biggest thing in place too. You can have all of these policies, but if you don't have the doctors, the people who can do the diagnosing and the testing, the policies, they don't make sense. Um, it's good to have them. It's good to have like, let's be prepared. Let's start doing awareness. Let's start doing inclusion. I love seeing how many countries are trying to participate and light it up for Autism Day in April, and seeing that like Africa like wants to light it blue, like every country wants to be represented, which is amazing because 5 years ago that was like unheard of. And so these policies in place, they're great. However, we need to make sure that we have the people in place. Same thing with South Africa. They have the education white paper, which it essentially gives policies on how to promote inclusion and awareness, but it doesn't say that they have to provide the inclusion and awareness. And again, it goes into education. So something I've gotten to see in South Africa specifically is I've gotten to go to a couple government schools that are specifically for children with disabilities. Whereas the government schools for children without disabilities are 100% funded by the government. And then you get to these schools for disabilities, and they're only 10% funded by the government. Parents have to pay school fees, parents have to pay uniform fees. Um, and when these kids are at these schools, they're separated from peers. So, like, they're with peers who are like them, but they're not getting to see typical peers. So they're not getting to be included into normal day-to-day life with who they may encounter when they're in public. Um, so it's good to see those schools have, and like when I see those schools, they are amazing. But again, they're in like Johannesburg, they're in the Pretoria area, they're in the main cities where kids that I go help are an hour, hour and a half away from that main city by taxi. And who's paying for the taxis? Who's paying to get these kids to these schools? We have several kids that we've been working with in South Africa where their parents have been on wait list for at least 2 or 3 years just to get them assessed to get into a school with special needs. And the crazy part is in South Africa, this is one of their basic human rights. The child has the basic right to go to school from the ages of, I believe it's like 7 to 17, is what are in place for human rights. So the fact that there are these human right laws that these kids have to go to school or they deserve to go to school, but then nobody's enforcing them. Um, and then Nigeria also has a Disability Act that came out in 2018 that says you can't discriminate against a person with a disability. But autism's not a visible disability. So how do you know that someone has autism? How do you know that you're not discriminating against someone with autism? So that's what also makes it hard. And I'm hoping in other sessions, like they talked about that, like there are a lot of kids out there that I work with who are going to live a normal life, as normal as it can be, but they still have some challenges. Um, and so, how do you know if you're discriminating against someone when you can't tell that they visibly have a disability? So that's more of the awareness and the education and going into things like that. Um, and so that's kind of like where my heart is like, yes, we have these policies, but we need to be training. We need to be training caregivers. We need to be training teachers. We need to be training pastors. One of my things in South Africa is I want to train the pastors because they have such a huge connection with their community. So if the pastors are more aware of what's going on in their community, and they have the trust of those within their community, it makes it so much easier for them to say, hey, I think this might be something going on with your child. And then having the parents seek help and seeking that stuff. So it's education needs to be done, awareness needs to be done. And yes, having these policies in place is great, but we need more providers. And there's not a lot of schools out there. There's not a lot of training out there. Um, that's getting people into this field. They're not learning about how to work with children with autism. So that's the big change we need to see happen is more providers that are BCBAs or IBAs getting out there and training and producing new BCBAs and new IBAs who are doing quality work. Because that's something we always preach is quality, compassionate work. Um, and going from there with that. Autism is not rare in Africa. It's just less researched, less identified, and less resourced. So no data, no policies, no services, no research. So what are we supposed to do with that? That's a common thing I get asked all the time is like, well, why is autism here? How do we know? Or it's not as bad as it is in the US, but there's no data. There's no data and there's no research. There's research coming out in the last few years, which is amazing to see. But again, it's that awareness and knowing, so that parents can volunteer to be part of this research, so that teachers can volunteer to be part of this research to say, like, hey, we're ready to make a difference. We want to make sure we're training and we're educating and that we are providing this stuff for them. Um, and so yeah, so it's not rare. It needs, there's a lot more we need to do out there. And then the consequences of not having these resources. Children don't go to school. Parents are embarrassed. Parents think that their child shouldn't be going to school. On the other side, I've seen teachers who tell parents their kid can't come to school because they're naughty. And it's not that they're naughty, it's they have a disability and they learn differently and they need to be taught differently. Um, Parents not understanding the behavioral aspect and the communication challenges. Um, so the child can't communicate. Behavior is a form of communication. So even if the child can communicate, but they can't get their point across, they're still going to have behaviors. And those behaviors become, why is my kid naughty? And unfortunately, we see it a lot is that parents will resort to spanking. And when your child has a disability, that's not going to be effective. Um, and then you have teachers, they're just undertrained. They don't know what to do. That's a lot of, now that we're educating teachers, we've been in services for 2 years with South Africa. And now we have teachers asking even bolder questions of like, how do I know it's not trauma? How do I know this child's not being beaten at home versus this is autism? So the fact that they're thinking like that, of like, how do I know the difference? Is like mind blowing to me that they are like every time we go, they're eager to learn. They're eager to be like, I want to help these kids. How do I make sure they get the best resources possible? And then the unfortunate part with that is once they leave that school, they're now going to the public schools and they have teachers who are not trained. They go from having teachers who have been trained to teachers who are not trained. So that's a narrative we got to change too. We got to get into the schools and we got to get training done for them. Um, just to make sure everyone's aware. So now what are we doing? What responsibility do global researchers, clinicians, and policy makers have to ensure autism research is inclusive? We need to be out in the rural areas. We need to be out in the townships. We need to be out in the village. We need to be making the impacts there. If we're in a major city, that's not going to make the impact. Um, a lot of these parents don't have access to the things that they do if they were in the city. In the areas that I'm working in South Africa, it's the go-go's, the grandmas. The grandmas have 8 grandkids that they're taking care of while the mom and dad go to work. And what is the go-go supposed to do? She doesn't know. She doesn't know what's going on because she's older, and in her time, she may never have had an experience with a child with a disability. So we need to be pushing for the awareness and the acceptance, but we also need to start training. We need to find people to train who want to start working with kids with autism so that we can start shifting minds and that we can start shifting the inclusion piece of like it's no longer you have to live in the main city to get services. It's you can live out in the village, you can live out in the townships, and you can still get the services that you're entitled to because of all of these policies in place that say you are supposed to get these services. So we need to keep pushing for that. And we need to push the government in some areas to get out to those villages and to get to the townships because that's not fair if they're like, oh, yeah, we're doing it, but only if you live in the main city. Those people in charge, the ministries of education, the government people, they need to go to the villages where they probably were born and raised and into the townships, and they need to get the help there. They need to bring people there to help get the diagnostic done. Once the diagnosing is done, it gives these parents access to other things. It in the village, it's not as easily accessible, but it at least gives them an understanding of what they can do and what they know is going on with their child, their grandchild, and then how to find the resources from there. That's where we're hoping to help with like little NGOs that we're working with of giving them a list of resources. Um, and unfortunately, like in Africa, so here in the United States, most of these services are covered under health insurances. And what I'm seeing in South Africa alone and Nigeria It's not covered. These parents are expected to pay out of pocket, and they're expected to pay probably what they make in a month, and that's not equal access either. So we need to find ways to help these parents get services and start changing this shift and get the resources they need into the schools, into the government, and give it to them for reduced costs so that their child can survive and not be hidden and not be a burden to the village because the villages are raising the children there. And so we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to ensure that this research is not limited to location or your economic status. You should be getting services regardless of who you are. And so that's the push we need. That's the push we need. So we need more training within the countries. We need more training with teachers, more training with government policymakers, and just making sure that they understand what we need to do. So yeah. So questions. I know I talk fast, so I went a little quicker than I thought I would.
Well, you're right on time. Well, thank you so much for wonderful presentation. It's been an amazing time having you here. Well, before we let you go, we have some questions for you from our viewers who are joining us from all over Africa and the globe. So, first one is coming from Tabo. Tabo says, "Why does representation in autism research truly matter?" If
It,
you would stop sharing your screen as well, it will
oh,
help us to
yeah,
manage
yeah.
this.
Okay, let me
Okay.
choose. It matters because the more representation there is, the more funding, the more research. So a lot of the funding that's happening like in Cape Town in South Africa, that's being done by the government, but it's being done in high economic areas. So it does matter who's being represented because if only the rich are being represented, that doesn't give a whole picture. And then also, not only that we need those numbers or that representation, but we need to help the ones who are in the village and in the townships because they matter too. So just because they don't have the money that the other ones do, they matter and they need to get the same access to services that the kids in the rich areas are getting. Because that's the biggest difference we need to make is making sure that everyone has equal access.
Okay. It's important that everyone has equal access, irrespective of where they live or what
Mhm.
they can afford. And I think this is one thing that is scarce because of lack of data and so many other things that we struggle with as Africans. Moving to the next question from Rehama. Rehama says, "What risk arise when data excludes African realities?"
Say that again.
What risk arise when data excludes African realities?
It goes back to that not getting the services, not getting um, what is needed and what's deserved. So if we don't include Africa in the data, then everyone's going to think, oh, Africa's fine. They're good. They don't need help.
Uh-huh.
Um, but they do. They need some help with the research and the education, and the awareness. And it's coming. And it would be so great to see when the data is representing Africa, how far Africa has come, with the research and the education and how great they are doing with their children. Someone had just sat down and told me that like Africa is going to have the biggest population of 17 to 26-year-olds and by 2030. Imagine if that in the world, not just Africa, the world. So imagine if that population is educated on autism and awareness and making sure that their brothers and sisters and cousins have access to autism research.
Wow. And finally, from Nelson, Nelson is asking, how can African-led research influence policy and funding decisions?
I know here in the States,
Hmm.
when the research is done, they show that like, oh, we need to do more research, and the funding is easier to get for those things. I know in Africa, that's things we have to start looking at is that the numbers aren't showing it. So we need to convince, or we need to let the government know it's here. So how do we convince the government to do the funding versus the funding from private people? Whereas here in the States, a lot of it is government funded. They want to know what's working for autism, how to work with children with autism. They sometimes want to find a cure. We're not sure if there is a cure yet, but they're still trying to identify what's causing it. And so putting Africa into that category too, if we're able to identify maybe it's something in our environment, then what's in the African environment that could be causing it? But is it genetics? That's what everything's pointing to, but it's like, but the environment can contribute to like mutation. So we just need that kind of stuff to help us understand like what's causing it, what's going on, and then get the funding there to show that these kids can be successful. Here in the States, we have a lot of programs that are funded where kids get to go to work. So children with disabilities become adults with disabilities who now have jobs and are getting paid and aren't having to live at home. And some do have to live at home and some do have to work jobs where they're getting paid little, but that's the goal too. So we need to make sure that like stores in Africa and shops are taking those with disabilities. And that's where the training and research come into play as well.
Okay. Just being curious. I know that we could talk about cure, and definitely there's nothing. Nobody has been able. Is there anything that exists in the United States?
For a cure, no, no. Yeah, they're still trying to research what's causing it. So, there's just a lot pointing to genetics. And then is there something within our environment that's alternating our genetics? We don't know.
Oh, thank you. It's been an amazing time having you on the program, Lisa. And thank you because somehow your background gives you the a balanced perspective from both the African and the US because of your relation with the African community. And I want to
Yeah.
thank you for taking out your time to come and educate us and share your wealth of experience with us this afternoon. Thank you
Yes.
so
Thank
much
you
for
so
being
much for
here.
having me.
All right. Before you leave us, any final words, any final things you would like to say?
I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and this is going to be the change that Africa needs because this is what's going to get Africa on the map and get Africa the funding that they need to make sure that we're doing the research correctly and then getting providers trained correctly.
Thank you so much. Because this is a lifelong journey. Autism requires lifelong care. So the place
Exactly.
of finance and financing cannot be overemphasized. Thank you so much for being here once again. It's been a pleasure having
Thank
you
you.
here.
Thank
All
you.
right. So thank you. And the audience who have continued to stay with us, we will take a short break, and when we return, we will be transitioning to the Portuguese version, which will be co-moderated by my co-moderator Paul, who will join us very soon. So stay with us, and we will return in the next 25 minutes. Thank you so much.